and I saw her face. Now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind.
Moving out 9 times the speed of sound. Roger.
Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to take a little bit of a break of all the project work on the S4, the VW201. I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to do some regular maintenance on my sister's Tiguan, which is right behind me. So in no particular order, what we're doing today is front and back suspension with Bilstein shocks, new springs all around, sway bar links front to back, tie rod ends on the front, ball joints on the front. We're going to do an engine oil change. We're going to do a transmission service with new filter and gasket and replace the spark plugs and the intake filter. So this video will be perfect if you are the owner Tiguan that's going to need a lot of service in the next couple of months and you're trying to figure out, how expensive this is going to be. Is it worth it? Or perhaps you're thinking of buying a used Tiguan, and in which case, we're going to inspect some of the issues together and we're going to figure out how hard this job is. Do you need any special tools? Do you need any special skills? How much time this is really going to take. So I'm going to try and time roughly how much all of this is going to, take. The majority of the work is going to be the suspension, transmission, and engine oil service. These are fairly regular maintenance items that pretty much any shop can do within a couple of hours. So that's the work for today. I'm going to set a timer and I'm going to see how long it's going to take. Let's go. So for the front suspension, I'm going to be replacing a few items today: spring, shock, sway bar link, ball joint at the bottom, and tie rod at the side here. Now the suspension setup is pretty standard for Volkswagen. It's used on a ton of vehicles. It's not very complicated. You've got 3 points on top of the shock, and you've got one bolt at the bottom holding it to the knuckle. It's a bit annoying to do this because to get the shock out of the knuckle, you have to open the knuckle up and hammer the out of it. Now last time I did this job, I made a mistake. I undid all of the bolts for all of the pieces that I was replacing, and that caused a lot of issues after trying to get the shock out because everything was just loose and flopping around everywhere. So today I'm going to tackle it slightly different. I'm going to deal with the shock and the spring as if I was not replacing anything else. And then once I get that done, then I'm going to finish off with the rest of the items. I wanted to show you something before I actually tackle the job because it caused me quite a bit of delay last time. This is the top mount for the shock. So the shock goes through here and then that bolts up to the car. So you've got 3 bolts that sit on top of it. Now, as you can imagine, this is a 13-year-old vehicle with still original suspension. These bolts are baited in salt for 13 years. They were quite well stuck in here. And the problem is, while 2 out of 3 came out perfectly fine, the third one, once I hit it with the impact, actually spun the nut off of the mount. You've got the spring sitting right here, so you can't really reach in and get anything on this. Plus, they're so rusted that they actually rounded off and you cannot even get a wrench on top. So what I ended up having to do is actually remove the shock. So I undid the shock, left the mount on the car, and I had to get in there and sort of cut it. So be careful if you're doing this. Depending on where you live, it's probably rusted up. These bolts are rusted. So use a lot of penetrating oil, a lot of patience. Don't rush. Perhaps try to undo the bolts by hand first before hitting them with an impact, because dealing with this after the fact is actually quite a bit of time. So first things first, let's undo this bolt, open up the knuckle and see if we can get that shock out of here. And then once we do that, we can undo it at the top and get everything out. All right, so technically nothing holding the shock to the knuckle here except for all of the rust that's probably formed up inside. There's really no good way to do this. You can get a wedge in the back here to help you open this up a little bit. My problem is I don't have any of the special tools. I think there's a couple of things you can use. So I just usually use a chisel. But the moment you start hammering the knuckle down, the chisel just falls off anyway. So I usually just soak it in penetrating oil, heat it up a little bit, try to get things moving a little bit, and just start hammering. With that loosened up, you're going to notice the spring is currently pushing the shock body down, so it'll make it quite a bit harder for us to go away from it. So what I'm going to do is compact the spring so that the shock body frees up and then we can push it down. We gotta do the sway bar link and the 3 bolts at the top, and then the shock will come out. To access the 3 bolts at the top, we got to get this plastic cover off here. Every single time I've ever tried to take this off with the windshield wipers in place, or like taking the windshield wipers off, I end up cracking this. You know, after 13 years, it's brittle enough. So what I'm going to try and do now is actually undo the 3 bolts without removing the plastic piece. You should have enough room to fit it. They're small bolts. They should be relatively low torque, so I don't really need to get a big impact gun inside there. So let's try and see if we can do it without removing this. So unfortunately, even though I soaked these up in penetrating oil and let them sit overnight, they once again sheared the nuts from the mount, which means I'm about to have some fun. Same thing as last time, I was not lucky enough to avoid this. So what happens is the bolt is rusted and seizes inside of the nut, and the moment you start undoing it from the top, it simply spins the nut right off of the mount. So there's really nothing you can do while the shock's inside to actually grab a hold of this. So with the shock out, I guess I'm going to try to put a socket on this or somehow grab the nut and gently try to undo the bolt from the top. But last time I had to cut both bolts off, and I'm really not looking forward to doing this. There's really no space at the top there. Let's see what we can do. I think I'm going to save you guys the emotional pain of watching me struggle with this, but I do want to show you what the actual problem is. The 3 nuts that hold the mount to the body are basically press fit into this mount here. So what ends up happening is, with a set of rusted bolts, the moment you put a little bit of torque on the bolt trying to take it out, it spins the nut into the mount. Okay, in fact here you can see on this one, it completely sheared it right off. What that leaves you unfortunately with is no good way of really grabbing these to try and undo the bolts, especially if they're rusted. Now these do look like nuts, so it looks like you can fit a socket over it, but the problem is you don't really have any room whatsoever while this thing is mounted on the car. Not to mention that the rubber on the mount around actually prevents you from putting a good socket in here. I tried on both sides, they don't look that rusted. It looks like the socket should be able to fit. It's a size 13, but I had a very hard time. On both of these I had to put heat on the bolt, which of course starts burning the rubber, which is of course a fire hazard. So if you do end up getting into the situation, be very careful, because if you're not, you may actually light your car on fire and have a nice fun time putting it out. This is a very poor design, and to be honest with you, I don't understand why it has to be this tight here on the nut. I mean, if you're expecting to do this, why can't you just make the nut a little bit bigger and give it a little bit of room around the mount so that you can actually fit a socket on it? So that's fine. I mean, you know, the bolt seizes and, you know, shears this off, okay, but give people some way of actually taking this off. I'm not a mechanic, obviously, so maybe there's people out there that can do this in a better fashion, but, you know, after 20 years of working on cars, this stuff still baffles me. And frankly, if you took this to a mechanic with both of these seized bolts, I think you're going to have somebody very unhappy and probably charge you the extra hours that it took to take this apart. Perhaps this is only a problem in Canada. I've had this discussion with you guys before about rusted bolts and how they're apparently not an issue anywhere else in the world, but this is a poor design. So if you're going to be doing this to your car, be very careful. Take all the time in the world, soak these up, be patient, because the alternative is not very good. All right, I'll just go ahead and put everything back together and finish this project. It's the only spring that's not actually broken. There's arrows pointing the front and the back of the car. So once it goes in, we have to put the bolts on top. Now comes the fun part of putting the knuckle back on the shock. What I normally do is I'll put the jack underneath and then start lifting the knuckle so that it's working against the spring. So as you're hammering it in, the shock itself pushes down. I've got a severe thunderstorm starting here, so I might lose power in a couple of minutes. Might have to do this offline. So I'll check back with you when it's done. Yeah, just as I suspected, the power went out because of the big storm, so I had to finish everything on batteries here. Just want to show you new sway bar link and the new ball joint right there. Once the shock mount was done, the rest was actually pretty trivial. It's not really a big deal. The ball joint on the bottom is a little bit annoying to do, because you don't really have access at the top of the bolt here to lock it. So once you do the nut and it starts spinning out, it's a bit of a problem, but not horrible. All right, at the back things are a little bit simpler. We've got two bolts holding the shock up at the top there, and there's one big bolt holding the shock at the bottom, so pretty straightforward to take the shock off. You can see this one's leaked out, so you know it's pretty much done. The sway bar link is right back here. It's held with one bolt here and one bolt on the other side for the sway bar. Now, if you were not replacing the spring, you probably wouldn't have to remove it. You can do the shock and the sway bar link without taking the spring out. It's a little bit tight with the bolt here, but not impossible if you've got the right tools. Since I'm gonna go ahead and replace the spring, in actual fact, the bottom rubber mount for this, which is supposed to be in there, actually fell out. How that happens, I have no idea, seeing as the spring is always sitting on top of it, but the rubber was actually sitting like this inside the spring. I have no idea how this happened. In any case, because I'm replacing the spring on the other side, this one has to come out. And in actual fact, taking the spring out gives you a little bit more room to play with this bolt here. So that's what we're gonna do. So the sequence of events: undo the top two bolts, undo the sway bar link, which will allow you to, push the entire assembly down a little bit. We're gonna have to compress the spring because there's just no way to take it out without doing that. Compress the spring, get it out of the way, change the shock, put the spring back in, and attach the sway bar link. All right, let's go get it done. With the sway bar link removed and the shock undone at the top, we've got quite a bit more flex in the bottom of the suspension here. So now we're gonna go ahead and compress the spring, get it out of the way, and take the shock off. The last thing we need to do is remove the big bolt. It's sitting inside the aluminum housing. It's not open at the other side, so technically it shouldn't be rusted, it shouldn't be too bad. However, it is a steel bolt sitting inside of aluminum. You can't really get any penetrating oil inside here to help you out. So what I like to do is heat it up with a little bit of heat. Obviously be careful with your speed sensor here and try and stay away from the rubber on the shock so you don't start a fire. Yeah, originally the spring did not look like it was broken, but actually, as you can see, it's missing half a coil. So both the left and the right side of the rear are broken, which is, this continues to baffle me every single time I replace one of these springs. But anyways, let's put the new spring and shock back in and finish up the corner. We need to get the bump stop off of the old shock. Yeah, this thing is original. Fantastic, 160,000 kilometers. Good for you. Suppose we can clean this up a little bit. Now here's the tricky part. I don't really have a tool that will allow me to tighten this nut without spinning the shaft here. The moment the nut goes inside the housing, you can't even access it anymore. I imagine there's some sort of a special tool for this. I don't have it. So what I normally do, I use the vice grips right up here at the top, and I just power right through the nut. Now, before you say how wrong that is, and you're supposed to hold the shaft, stuff like that, yeah, fully agreed. You can't hold the shaft down here where it's actually gonna go inside the shock body, but this piece is inside the bump stop. So this part of the shock will never go inside the body and potentially damage your seals. So I'm not too worried about it. I'm gonna grab it right up at the top here and we're gonna get it done. We're good to go. Bump stop goes over in the top. And we put the cap on. And that's it. Now we can start mounting back. The installation is about the reverse. Shock's gonna go in first. I'm gonna hook up the sway bar link second because I don't wanna go against the spring after that, and then the spring is gonna go in last. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. So there we go, give everything the good and tight, and we are ready to go. Last thing we gotta do, oil change on the motor, oil change on transmission, new spark plugs, air filter. Let's do it. Yeah, the spark plugs pretty much original from what I can tell. So 160,000 kilometers on these. They don't look terrible. They're not as bad as the Q5 ones, but certainly not very healthy. All right, last thing we're gonna do here, clean up the oil pan for the transmission. Quite a lot of metal here, but this is pretty normal. Now, considering this is original, I'm guessing, you know, the magnets are fairly dirty. That's fine, 106,000 kilometers. So let's clean everything up, new gasket, and then we'll put it back together. New gasket. Clean up the gasket surface. New filter. It's really only one way to install it. We've got 6 liters of oil in. Now we have to let it warm up to between 35 and 45 degrees. And then we're gonna open the drain, let the excessive oil flow out, and then we close the cap and we're good to go. And that's the Tiguan done, folks. As you saw yourself, not a very complicated job. Front rear suspension. Surprising yet again to see broken springs on one of these cars, let alone 3 broken springs in this particular case. I may have bought this car another 40-50,000 kilometers before my sister gets fed up with it and sell it. It still has issues. It's not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's a good daily car, and you know, hauling kids around, it's not so bad. As far as cost for this goes, the parts added up to about $1,200. I'm not including the new tires and stuff I put on there, but parts alone for the suspension job that you saw, about 1,200 bucks. Labor, I was at about 10 to 12 hours roughly, and I say roughly because of all the delay I had with rusted bolts, which you may or may not have. If you do live in sort of rust prone areas, count for, you know, at least 3 hours per corner on the front, and maybe hour and a half, 2 hours for the backs, so you can deal with those stuck bolts and issues like that. At the end of the day, it's not a very complicated job. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. So that's it for the Tiguan. In the next episode, we're going to shift gears and we're going to dive into our new Sprinter, the NCV3. When I say new, you know, this thing has got 350,000 kilometers, but it's new to us. If you have followed the channel for a while, you know that I've done some work on the 2003 to 2006 T1N Sprinters with the OM647 diesel engine. This is the OM642, the V6, which is the same as what I've got in the GL. So we're going to start off with some basic maintenance on the truck, transmission oil change, engine oil change, fuel filter change, that kind of stuff. And then we're going to deal with any other issues that pop up to put this back on the road to make it a daily. All right, as always, if you like the content, click the thumbs up. If you want to see more, click subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Cheers.